Today we're looking at the use of technology in cities and what it can do for citizens in a digital age. Many refer to this as smart cities. Well, public services do need to change with the times, but what is the best way to do this? Well, in a moment I'm talking to Simon Giles, Global Cities Lead at Accenture. I'm Faye Barker and welcome to the Business Debate. Simon, welcome to the London Stock Exchange studios.
Thank you very much for having me.
There's been a lot of debate, hasn't there, about the potential for the use of technology in cities. Some refer to it as smart cities. But what is a smart city and is it really that smart?
Well, I think traditionally the definition has all been about the technology that they've used. So sensing and control technologies, or what's come to be known as the Internet of Things. Over the last decade, that's actually morphed quite a lot. And it's become more generally the use of information technology in the service of all the needs of the city. So it's now a much broader definition, and pretty much any service that you can imagine, if it's got technology associated with it, it becomes part of the smart city mandate.
So given the potential for the use of technology in cities, what progress has been made so far?
Well, I think in reality the progress has been pretty patchy. We've seen a lot of progress in the city-states, places like Singapore and Dubai, where they have an alignment of the right level of funding and governance. Elsewhere, cities have been much more focused on the implementation of specific use cases to tackle the issues that are at hand for them.
So what would you say is perhaps holding progress back here?
Well, I think there are three things. The first is that there tended to be a focus on the enabling technologies as opposed to how those technologies were actually being used, what the service was. The second is there was much more of a focus or lack of focus on how they were actually creating value. And unless you can articulate how it's making a difference for people on a day-to-day basis, it's hard for politicians to make the case for using the public purse. And then finally, there's a skills challenge. Cities haven't normally had the right type of blend of skills, and they haven't had the right procurement mechanisms in place to be able to procure those skills from a broad coalition of providers. So those are the three things that tended to hold us back.
So a bit of a transitional stage in terms of using technology in cities. What steps should be taken, do you think, to make a bit more progress?
Well, I think I'd split them into the three parts. So I think the first part that we need to do is go back to the fundamentals of understanding what are the issues that we're trying to solve. Let's not focus on the technologies themselves. Let's focus on the types of problems we want to solve. And then focus on the design rather than the engineering. How would I redesign the way a service is delivered, and then think about how I would use technology in that service. And the second thing is I'd really focus on the storytelling. But it's not just about how I tell the stories, the human interest stories of how a technology is changing life. It's also about how I start to think about quantifying that value and the way that it's being created. If I have both the quantification and the human interest story, then I have both sides of the equation for the politicians to be able to make the justifications for investing the public purse. And then finally, I'd reinvest in retooling and reskilling the public sector workers that are working in the city to be able to implement the types of technologies that they would hope to be able to implement, but also think about building ecosystems of suppliers, public sector, private sector, academic institutions working in a more collaborative way, and having the city acting as more of a market maker and broker for those types of solutions.
A lot of this is going to cost money, obviously, to change and adapt with a digital age. Considering the constraints on public finances, I mean, how will this work considering that financial environment that so many places face?
It's a real challenge, and the reality is as long as we see technology as an incremental cost within the budget, we're going to be limited because we can't compete with funding more frontline service delivery, social workers, nurses, police. So we need to focus on how technology can drive efficiency and productivity in the services that are already delivered to create some headroom in the budget to reinvest in new services using that technology and the retooling and reskilling of the workforce.
And you talk about the workforce and getting those skills in place. How much of a challenge is that really?
Well, I think it's always a challenge. And with the advent of new technologies like artificial intelligence and software robotics, we're starting to see the role of the public sector worker changing significantly. So over the next decade, we really need to focus in on how we're going to reskill and retool those workers to be effective within that framework. So reinvest both on the technology side, but also in the human capital, build those skills and capabilities.
And are you optimistic about the future? I mean, is progress being made, and is this going to work? It's just a matter of time, really.
Yeah, I think it's been relatively slow going, but over the last 2 years we've seen huge progress. Once we've become more focused on where the value is being created, being more focused on design, and then being focused on building those skills and capabilities, I think we're going to start to really accelerate.
Which cities would you say are actually doing this really well and could be models perhaps for other cities to use technology efficiently?
Well, the city-states, so Singapore, Dubai, and more recently Qatar are doing very well. But it's also in places like the UK, the more unusual cities, places like Bristol, Peterborough, Glasgow, not necessarily the Londons and the Birminghams of the world, although they're doing great things. But I would say it is a really broad spectrum, and it tends to focus on the cities that have leaders that are really interested in the topic.
Simon Giles, thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. Do join us again next time on The Business Debate.